Today, approval is not just felt, it is measured, counted, and showcased before the world. A simple glance at a glowing screen tells us whether we are accepted, whether we belong, whether the crowd has chosen to validate our existence. The number of likes, comments, and followers has replaced the silent nods of a village or the respect of a small community. It feels harmless, even empowering. After all, what is wrong with wanting to be liked? Isn't it proof that we are kind, generous, and good? But beneath this seemingly innocent desire lies a silent trap. The hunger for approval, when stretched across millions of eyes, is not a strength, it is a weakness. It leaves us fragile, uncertain, and willing to sacrifice truth for applause. It erodes individuality, replacing authenticity with masks carefully designed to please. We begin to bend our opinions, dull our edges, and hide our convictions in exchange for the fleeting comfort of acceptance. What begins as a small compromise soon becomes a habit, and eventually, a way of life. The danger is not merely personal. Entire societies have collapsed under the weight of their obsession with approval. When too many people prefer comfort over honesty, conformity over courage, the collective mind becomes malleable, easily swayed by demagogues, corporations, and algorithms that understand our need to belong better than we do ourselves. The pursuit of being universally liked weakens not only individuals but civilizations. Carl Jung warned that the repression of one's authentic self, done to avoid conflict or rejection, creates what he called the shadow. The shadow is not destroyed by suppression, it is merely buried, waiting for the moment to erupt. Every unspoken truth, every silenced disagreement, every denied impulse, they all sink into the depths of the unconscious, building pressure. To be universally liked is to constantly bury parts of oneself, until eventually we are strangers to our own soul. And here lies the central paradox. The more we chase approval, the further we drift from who we really are. We trade authenticity for applause, but the applause is never enough. We silence our convictions for the sake of harmony, only to find that harmony is shallow, fragile, and temporary. The very thing we think will protect us, being liked by everyone, becomes the force that weakens us, both individually and collectively. This video is not about teaching you how to be more charming or more agreeable. It is about stripping away the illusion that universal approval is a virtue. By the end of this journey, you will see the pursuit of being liked by everyone not as a sign of kindness, but as a dangerous form of self-betrayal. We will look at why this hunger exists, how it has been weaponized throughout history, and most importantly, how to break free from it. Because the truth is simple, but uncomfortable. If you are liked by everyone, it is almost certain that you have abandoned yourself. Carl Jung once wrote that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. These words were not just philosophical reflections, but a direct confrontation with the uncomfortable truth of human psychology. To understand why the pursuit of universal approval is so dangerous, we must first understand the shadow, the hidden dimension of ourselves that grows every time we silence who we really are for the sake of being liked. Jung's own life was a testament to wrestling with this hidden force. Born in Switzerland in 1875, he grew up in a deeply religious household, torn between his father's rigid Protestant faith and his own mystical, intuitive visions. From an early age, Jung realized that human beings are not simply rational actors, but creatures of deep conflict, beings who contain both light and darkness, both virtue and vice. Unlike Freud, who emphasized repression primarily in terms of sexuality, Jung expanded the concept to something far more vast and unsettling, that we bury not only our socially unacceptable impulses, but also the most vital parts of ourselves that might threaten acceptance, our independence, our originality, our capacity to defy the crowd. The shadow, Jung argued, is not just where we hide our vices. It is also where we exile our authenticity. Anger, ambition, doubt, competitiveness, even bursts of creative genius. All these can end up in the shadow if we fear that expressing them will make others turn against us. The more we obsess over being liked, the more ruthless we become in suppressing these forces. Yet repression does not mean elimination. The shadow does not die, it festers. It leaks out in envy, in passive aggression, in sudden irrational outbursts, or in the haunting sense that one's life is being lived according to the expectations of others rather than one's own truth. History offers us countless examples of this tension between authenticity and approval. Consider Socrates, who chose death over conformity, becoming a martyr for philosophy itself. Or Galileo, condemned by the church for daring to tell the truth about the universe, only to be celebrated centuries later as a pioneer of science. These figures remind us that to reveal one's shadow, one's forbidden insights, one's uncomfortable truths, is often to invite rejection in the moment, but also to plant the seeds of a legacy that transcends time. Contrast this with those who devote their lives to being universally accepted. They may be praised for their politeness, their diplomacy, their harmlessness, but rarely do they change the course of history. They survive comfortably, but they rarely leave behind anything that shakes the human spirit. Jung believed that this was the great tragedy of repression. In burying our darkness, we also bury our potential. And the danger extends beyond the individual. When whole societies demand conformity, when cultural approval becomes the highest good, the collective shadow grows monstrous. We see it in the witch hunts of the past, where communities projected their denied fears onto innocent victims. We see it in modern times, where political correctness or propaganda can force people into silence, only for resentment and hatred to erupt later in destructive, uncontrollable forms. Jung's insight remains piercingly relevant today. In an age of likes, follows, and social validation, people have never been more obsessed with crafting an image of themselves that offends no one. Yet in doing so, they often feel more fragmented, more anxious, and more hollow. The shadow does not vanish simply because it is unacknowledged. It waits. And when it finally emerges, it does so in ways we cannot control. Carl Jung's warning is clear. The price of trying to be universally liked is not peace, it is self-betrayal. The shadow you repress to gain approval becomes the very force that later manipulates and destroys you. To integrate it, to face it consciously, is not an act of selfishness, but of liberation. For only when you stop hiding your shadow can you begin to live as your true self, untamed by the fragile opinions of others. The dream of being universally liked has haunted humanity for centuries, but it is a dream built on sand. The greatest figures in history, those who dared to speak truths too piercing for their age, were not embraced but condemned. Socrates, the father of philosophy, was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of Athens, not because he was malicious, but because he refused to flatter his society's illusions. Jesus of Nazareth, who preached love, forgiveness, and a radical reordering of values, was crucified by the very people he sought to liberate. Galileo, with a telescope and the courage to say that the earth moves around the sun, was silenced and condemned by a church unwilling to have its authority challenged. Each of them now stands as a giant in history, but in their own time, they were ridiculed, hated, and in some cases, destroyed. The lesson is unmistakable. To pursue universal approval is to abandon greatness. No one who alters the world is liked by all. And yet, in our modern age, the illusion persists. It takes new forms: the dopamine rush of likes and followers, the curated performance of corporate branding, the endless pressure to be seen as agreeable, harmless, and politically correct. We are told that being liked is the highest currency of success. But in reality, it has become one of the most suffocating prisons of our era. Psychology explains why this illusion is so intoxicating. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a tribe. To be cast out meant death, starvation, exposure, or vulnerability to predators. Approval was not a luxury, it was existence itself. That ancient wiring still governs our behavior, but the environment has changed. We no longer live in tribes of 50 or 100. We live on a global stage, where millions of eyes can judge us in an instant. What once protected us now poisons us. The instinct to seek approval, stretched across billions of connections, drives anxiety, conformity, and an endless cycle of self-erasure. The danger is that universal approval requires contradiction. To be liked by everyone, one must wear masks, shift shapes, and deny convictions. You must be bold and humble, outspoken yet inoffensive, passionate but never controversial. In practice, this means abandoning authenticity. It means living a fractured life, always calculating, always managing impressions, always sacrificing truth at the altar of appearances. This psychological strain is what cognitive dissonance feeds on. When our internal beliefs and external behaviors are in constant conflict, the mind is torn between reality and performance. The cost is exhaustion, the slow erosion of identity, and a gnawing sense of hollowness. The person who bends to please everyone discovers, too late, that they have pleased no one, and most of all, they have betrayed themselves. Even in the digital age, this tragedy is easy to see. The influencer who tries to appeal to every audience quickly fades into irrelevance, their voice drowned in a sea of safer, sharper personalities. The politician who avoids offense ends up inspiring nothing. The individual who carefully curates their online persona to avoid criticism often feels more anxious, more fragile, more enslaved to public opinion than those who dare to be disliked. The pursuit of universal approval is not just impossible, it is destructive. It crushes authenticity, it multiplies inner conflict, and it blinds us to the truth that the path of every meaningful life runs directly through rejection, criticism, and misunderstanding. To stand for something is to invite opposition. To reveal one's true self is to accept that not all will embrace it. Carl Jung understood that repression breeds the shadow, but history teaches us the same lesson in a different language. Those who try to belong everywhere belong nowhere. The illusion of universal approval is seductive because it promises safety. But in the end, it delivers only emptiness. The hunger to be liked does not come without a cost. Beneath the polished smiles, the polite silences, and the carefully managed appearances lies a quiet devastation. The compulsion to please others may look like kindness on the surface, but in reality, it corrodes from within. Carl Jung warned that repressing our true impulses in favor of social approval does not make them disappear. Instead, they sink into the unconscious, gathering power in the shadows of the psyche. What we deny outwardly festers inwardly. And over time, the individual who lives for the approval of others finds themselves haunted by anxiety, depression, and a profound sense of emptiness. Modern neuroscience adds another layer to Jung's insight. Every smile of validation, every approving word, every digital like delivers a burst of dopamine, the brain's chemical currency of reward. But dopamine is not designed to bring lasting contentment. It is designed to keep us seeking. Just as an addict craves the next high, the people pleaser becomes enslaved to the next compliment, the next signal of belonging, the next nod of acceptance. The brain learns to chase approval like a drug, but each fix leaves the void deeper than before. This cycle becomes a psychological trap. At first, people-pleasing feels rewarding. To smooth over conflict, to be admired, to be the one everyone can rely on. These bring a temporary sense of significance. But beneath that surface harmony lies a growing fracture. The individual bends themselves out of shape to fit every expectation, until they no longer know what shape they originally had. Their voice grows faint, their identity blurs, and slowly they realize that they have become an actor in a play written by everyone else. The cost of this performance is exhaustion. In workplaces across the world, we see it manifest as burnout. Employees smiling through endless meetings, saying yes to every demand, pushing aside personal boundaries to appear agreeable, until one day the body rebels. Anxiety attacks, sleepless nights, a constant weight of dread. These are not random misfortunes. They are the body's protest against a life lived for others at the expense of self. In the realm of social media, the pattern is even starker. Influencers tailor their identities like garments, stitching together whatever persona the algorithm seems to reward. One week it's humor, the next it's outrage, the next it's a sudden shift in aesthetics or ideology. The mask becomes so layered that even the influencer no longer remembers what face lies beneath. When the applause fades, as it inevitably does, many collapse under the weight of their own inauthenticity, caught in the paradox of being known by thousands yet unknown to themselves. And in everyday life, the tragedy repeats in quieter forms. The friend who never shares their true opinion to avoid conflict. The partner who hides their needs to maintain peace. The son or daughter who molds their life around parental expectations, only to realize years later that they never truly lived their own. Outwardly, these lives may look harmonious, but inwardly they often seethe with resentment. The very act of suppressing one's truth for approval plants a seed of bitterness, a whisper of betrayal that eventually grows into anger, sometimes directed outward, but often turned inward as self-loathing. What makes this cycle so dangerous is its invisibility. People-pleasing wears the mask of virtue. It is praised as politeness, generosity, humility. But in reality, it is often a fear-driven strategy of survival, a way to avoid disapproval, rejection, or the terrifying risk of standing alone. It is not selflessness, but self-erasure. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." To live authentically requires courage, for it means embracing traits that others may dislike, misunderstand, or reject. But those who refuse this challenge pay a different price: the slow suffocation of their soul under the weight of endless expectations. The psychological costs of people-pleasing are not small inconveniences. They are the silent architects of modern despair. Anxiety, depression, burnout, and resentment are not isolated illnesses. They are symptoms of a deeper fracture between the self we present to the world and the self we bury in silence. To live enslaved by the opinions of others is to trade freedom for comfort, authenticity for acceptance, life for performance. And perhaps the most chilling realization of all is this: people-pleasing does not guarantee love or safety. It only guarantees that when the applause fades, the only person left to face you in the silence of the night will be a stranger you no longer recognize. When the hunger for approval expands beyond the individual and seeps into entire societies, the consequences become catastrophic. What begins as personal people-pleasing mutates into collective conformity, where truth is sacrificed on the altar of comfort and authenticity is swallowed by the need to belong. Carl Jung warned that repressing the shadow does not eliminate it. It only drives it underground until it bursts forth in destructive, unconscious ways. What is true of individuals becomes even more dangerous at the scale of civilizations. A society that buries truth to avoid conflict or rejection creates fertile ground for manipulation, because the herd, once conditioned to seek approval above all else, will follow whichever voice promises safety, belonging, or validation. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He spoke of the herd mentality, the tendency of human beings to dissolve their individuality into the comfort of the crowd. For Nietzsche, the greatest danger to human greatness was not raw violence but mediocrity, the soft, suffocating conformity of the herd, where no one dares to stand apart. Herds are not strong, they are easily swayed. Their desire is not to think but to be reassured, not to confront reality but to be comforted by illusions. And illusions are precisely what the manipulator offers. History is littered with examples. Fascist regimes did not rise to power merely through fear but through approval. They offered people the intoxicating feeling of belonging to something larger than themselves. To cheer at rallies, to repeat slogans, to wear the same symbols. These were not acts of individual belief but of collective approval seeking, where dissent meant rejection, and rejection meant exile or death. In this environment, even those who doubted stayed silent, trapped in the same people-pleasing instinct that afflicts individuals. Better to be accepted and safe than rejected and alone. Tocqueville warned of another kind of danger, the tyranny of the majority. When a society becomes obsessed with fitting in, dissent is not silenced by law but by social pressure. Individuals censor themselves, not because they are forced, but because they fear being disliked, mocked, or ostracized. In such societies, truth no longer requires a dictator to suppress it. The people themselves suppress it out of fear of disapproval. Consumerism operates on a similar principle. The endless churn of products is not simply about utility, it is about identity. To buy the right clothes, drive the right car, use the right devices, all of this signals belonging. The consumer does not ask, "Do I need this?" but rather, "Will this make me acceptable?" Entire economies thrive on exploiting the ancient human fear of rejection. The result is not freedom but dependency on trends, on brands, on the approval of strangers. And in the digital age, this weakness has been weaponized. Algorithms have no ideology, no morality, no loyalty. They are designed for one thing only: to maximize engagement. And they have learned that the surest way to keep human beings hooked is to reward conformity and punish dissent. Say something agreeable, and you are flooded with likes, shares, and validation. Step outside the line, and you are met with outrage, mockery, or the dreaded silence of indifference. The algorithm becomes the new shepherd, and the digital crowd becomes the herd, bleeding together in unison. The consequences are profound. Debate collapses into echo chambers. Dissenters self-censor before speaking. Critical thought is drowned beneath waves of performative agreement. And the individual who might once have found courage to resist in solitude now faces the overwhelming pressure of a global audience. The instinct that once kept our ancestors safe in small tribes, the need to be liked, has become a civilizational vulnerability in a world where the tribe is now billions of strangers watching through glowing screens. This is why Jung's insights remain so relevant. A society that represses its shadow, its uncomfortable truths, its inconvenient dissenters, does not rid itself of them. Instead, the shadow festers and eventually erupts in destructive, uncontrollable ways. Fascism, propaganda, mass hysteria, cultural emptiness. All of these are the collective shadow unleashed by a people who would rather be liked than be honest. The terrifying truth is this: a society that seeks universal approval is not harmonious, but fragile. It cannot produce greatness because greatness requires dissent. It cannot face reality because reality offends. And it cannot resist manipulation because manipulators know precisely how to exploit its deepest fear, the fear of not belonging. The lesson is stark but necessary. When entire civilizations bend themselves to the will of approval, they do not march toward progress. They march, smiling, applauding, cheering, into the arms of tyranny, distraction, and decline. There is a paradox at the heart of human freedom. We often imagine that to be free is to be accepted by all, to be celebrated, admired, and included. Yet history, psychology, and philosophy tell us the opposite. True freedom requires the courage to disappoint. It requires the willingness to face rejection, to endure misunderstanding, and to live with the loneliness that comes from walking a path not sanctioned by the crowd. Carl Jung understood this deeply. For years, he worked closely with Sigmund Freud, the giant of psychoanalysis, and was expected to carry forward his mentor's legacy. But Jung began to see beyond Freud's rigid theories of sexuality, recognizing a broader and more mysterious architecture of the psyche, archetypes, symbols, the collective unconscious. To accept these insights meant alienating himself from the very circle that had elevated him. When Jung finally broke from Freud, he lost not just professional standing but personal relationships. He was ridiculed, marginalized, and branded as a heretic in his own discipline. Yet it was precisely this break, the willingness to disappoint, that allowed him to discover his own voice and reshape psychology for generations to come. His exile became the soil in which his freedom took root. Kierkegaard, too, warned us of the dangers of blending into the crowd. For him, the crowd was not a community of strength but an abstraction that erased individuality. He insisted that authenticity requires a leap of faith, a willingness to stand alone before existence itself. To choose oneself, rather than to dissolve into the expectations of others, is not easy. It means enduring scorn, misunderstanding, even ridicule. Yet Kierkegaard saw in this solitude not despair, but the highest form of courage. In his eyes, to be truly human was to bear the cost of one's own uniqueness. This is not just theory. History gives us figures who carried the weight of rejection with dignity. Socrates, when condemned by Athens, was offered a chance to escape execution. He could have bent to the will of the city, abandoned his questioning, and lived quietly. Instead, he accepted the hemlock. Because to him, betraying his principles would have been a fate worse than death. His refusal was not stubbornness. It was the embodiment of a truth. Integrity is freedom, and freedom is not negotiable. Even in modern times, the same pattern repeats. Whistleblowers, dissidents, truth-tellers, they rarely become heroes in the moment. They are condemned, exiled, or imprisoned. When Edward Snowden revealed the extent of surveillance, he became a fugitive overnight. He was not celebrated, he was attacked, vilified, hunted. Yet his act stands as a reminder: freedom often arrives wrapped in rejection, and history eventually vindicates those who endure it. The Stoics prepared the mind for this reality. Epictetus, once a slave, taught that the only true freedom lies in our capacity to control our own judgments. Rejection, insult, ridicule, these are not chains unless we consent to them. To live authentically, one must accept that others may turn away, disapprove, or even despise. But the one thing they cannot touch is the sovereignty of the soul. To be nobody but yourself in a world that demands conformity, wrote the poet E. Cummings, is the greatest act of courage. And this courage is the seed of freedom. It is not the applause of the many but the resilience of the few that shapes history. The lesson is clear: rejection is not the end of the story, but its beginning. To be cast out for your authenticity is not proof of failure, but of fidelity to your principles, your vision, your truth. The courage to disappoint is not about defiance for its own sake. It is about refusing to betray what you know to be real. In a world enslaved by approval, the act of embracing rejection is the ultimate liberation. The hunger to be universally approved is often mistaken for love. But love liberates, while approval enslaves. Love accepts us in our wholeness, with our flaws and shadows intact. Approval demands that we amputate the parts of ourselves that others may not like, leaving behind a hollowed-out version of who we truly are. What we call belonging often becomes quiet servitude, and what we call acceptance is, at times, nothing more than the reward for obedience. Carl Jung left us with a warning that echoes like a prophecy: what is not brought to consciousness returns as fate. The parts of ourselves we bury in order to be liked do not disappear, they bide their time. They re-emerge in compulsions, in self-sabotage, in the sense that life is happening to us rather than through us. To deny the shadow for the sake of applause is to trade depth for emptiness, to live half a life while pretending it is whole. History is filled with examples of what happens when entire societies chase the illusion of approval. Nations collapse into conformity, movements lose their soul, and individuals dissolve into masks. The tragedy is not simply that people live inauthentically, it is that they come to believe their mask is real. Jung saw this clearly. Without the courage to confront our rejected parts, we remain puppets of forces we do not understand. And so, we are left with a choice as haunting as it is liberating. Will we betray ourselves for the fleeting comfort of applause? Will we cling to masks even as they suffocate us? Or will we dare to endure the loneliness of authenticity, knowing that rejection is not a death sentence, but a birth into freedom? The cost of authenticity has always been rejection. Those who walked this path, Socrates, Kierkegaard, Jung himself, were not embraced in their time. They bore the weight of misunderstanding, isolation, and even persecution. Yet their integrity survived, and with it, their souls remained intact. The cost of approval, however, is far greater. It is nothing less than the surrender of the self. To gain the world's applause but lose your soul is the most silent form of tragedy. A life that is lived outwardly yet never truly lived within. The final question remains: will you choose the prison of approval or the freedom of authenticity? The world may never applaud your truth, but only in walking that path will you ever truly be free.